Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 4 of our weapons mini-series. I have Sir Imperial Mike and Sheldon with me today to expand on our weapons guide. In the previous episode, what we did is we talked about the awareness weapons. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the talent weapons. Now, this is all of the weapons post-glittering mines. So from the glittering mines all the way to the end of the game. If you guys are interested about learning about what weapons you would want to have when you start off the game, go ahead and click the link in the upper right corner. It'll take you directly to that video. Now, what we want to do is always bring you guys back to is the fundamentals and the abilities of the weapons. There was an entirely separate video that we did talking about the abilities. If you guys want to go ahead and revisit those, we went through the entire breakdown of every single ability in the game. You can also click the link in the upper right corner. But the main ones that we highlight are Rush, Reset, Heavy Attack, Speed Down with Damage, Splash, and Focus Restore. When it comes to talent weapons, though, there are 3 primary abilities that we mainly focus on. It's going to be Rush, Speed Down with Damage, and Focus Restore. There is some other abilities that those weapons use, but these are going to be the main focal points of the ones that we go over. So, what are you looking for talent weapons? Well, just like I had mentioned, you're looking for rush weapons to get you into the King's Maze and Vexor's Tower. Second, you want things that manipulate the timeline. Speed Down is a big component to the talent weapons. There's also some with Reset and of course Rush that we just discussed. Make sure to have Party Heal. There is one particular weapon that you can get that gives you Party Heal if you were not able to get it in the Intel weapons. Of course, we're going to be doing Intel weapons in a completely separate video, which will run through those weapons as well too. But you just want to make sure you have one weapon of that nature in your stash. Gold multiplier for revenue generation. This is a big component to talent weapons. Talent weapons are the only ones that allow you to have gold multiplier attached to the weapons, and therefore this is a great bonus for talent weapons. Focus Restore for utility. Just as I had mentioned, the Focus Restore is another important component to what the talent character can do for you, and therefore we will point out some weapons that do those. Now, before I get started here, getting into the weapons, Mike or Sheldon, do you guys have anything to add in terms of talent weapons and what we're looking for?
Just a small correction. There's actually more than one Party Heal weapon for talent.
Okay.
Yeah. So you definitely have options there. There's
Okay.
usually one Party Heal weapon per tier, except for I think tier 2 I don't think has one, but there's at least 3 Party Heal weapons for talent.
And the only purpose for picking up a talent weapon with Party Heals if you don't already have the ability through another item or through a different class of weapons.
Right.
So it's if you haven't been able to find it at all anywhere along the way, then at least pick it up when you find a talent weapon that has Party Heal on it.
And if you guys want to know something about me, I made a mistake there. I'm not going to edit that out. So just so these guys are going to do is if there's something that we say incorrect, we'll make sure to clarify those. And again, if there's anything that you guys feel that we may be wrong on, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. We'd be happy to address it and talk about it. You can even join us on Discord if you have any further questions. We'll be there to answer any of the questions that you guys may have. So let's get started here with the weapons themselves. The tier 2 weapons. So to start off, what we have is the Fancy Loot, which gives you the ability to rush. The Arch Loot, which gives you the ability to do Speed Down with damage. It also gives you the opportunity to do single target reset. The Ukulele, which there actually needs to be a special caveat to the Ukulele. So for those of you that play the game on PC, the Restore Focus, so Party Calm, allows for you to do 2 Restore Focus for each of your allies. In the PS or the Xbox version, You actually only get one. This is due to changes that the devs made for the new DLC, and therefore Yooka-Laylee is not as strong in the console version. I would actually knock this one down fairly far down the list, but what we want to do is make sure that we have that caveat because it is very powerful to get 2. It's definitely not as strong at 1. 4, which I thought was the ivory loot. I forgot that there was the ivory loot and all the other ones. This is your party heal weapon. Now, we don't necessarily put this up here from a damage point of view or something from an attack point of view. You would much rather want your fancy loot and your arch loot to be able to use the special abilities, but if you definitely need party heal, this is a weapon that you definitely want to have. Anything that you guys want to add with this tier list?
I like the fancy loot and I like the arch loot. I'm constantly looking for those. Yooka-Laylee I will pick up if it's available and I don't have any better talent weapon to work with. But yeah, the first 2, definitely I'm looking for those in the tier 2 time frame after the glowing mines.
Yeah.
There's something that we're going to probably go into in great length. Actually, all the way through tier 2 to tier 4, we're going to talk about. You'll kind of notice a pattern with all these weapons, and we'll go into a further discussion about why this single target rush is so important. So as you see here, we value the fancy loot with the rush ability. A 2-check rush is very nice for you to be able to utilize that, but also what's good too for this particular weapon is that you would be able to ignore armor as well too. So what you can do is get your full 2 damage out if you're able to hit your 3 checks there. Now on to the rest of the tier 2 list weapons. You have Fancy Tambura, which is mainly a damage output type weapon. It doesn't really have much ability to it. It is primarily if you want those other weapons, because being able to rush, reset, or speed down is much more valuable than just doing a couple extra damage. It gives your team an opportunity to be able to attack more and manipulate the timeline, which actually ends up saving your team overall. This extra 1 or 2 damage is not a big deal, but if this is the only one that you can get your hands on, this is probably would round off what we would say is the last one that you would want to get. The rest of these on this list is definitely the weaker ones of the tier 2 for sure. Bone Loot, which gives you 13 damage, and the power-up ability isn't really all that great for this particular weapon because it's not a very high damage output type weapon compared to your typical strength weapons. The Bamboo Tarango does do restore focus, but again, the Yooka-Laylee is just a better version of this, so you pretty much would want the Yooka-Laylee over the Bamboo Tarango. And the Metallic Loot. Definitely the weakest out of all of these weapons. You're almost never going to use armor up. You're never going to use resist up. It's going to be so rare that you do that using metallic loot is just something you're not looking for. On top of that too. Oh, go ahead, Sheldon.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, not to mention, it also doesn't have a gold multiplier on it. So, it makes it even worse.
Yes.
I call the metallic loot the crap loot.
And
I just sell it as soon as I get it.
And you don't have support range with it too. It's like
oh my god, yeah, that too.
It's pretty much a combination of all of the things combined that we probably shouldn't even have put it on the list. It was so bad, but we didn't want to at least just leave it off.
And it's a 5-check weapon. It's just everything about it's terrible.
Yeah, everything is ugh. Yeah.
Okay, so anything else you guys want to add in terms of tier 2 weapons?
Yeah, the Bamboo Tarango is only available to the Lost Civilization DLC, so no console.
Yes.
Which is why Yooka-Laylee was rated higher than that, because otherwise its restore focus ability is on par with the Yooka-Laylee, but a lot of people aren't going to have access to it.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add when you were talking about the Fancy Tambura and its damage aspect and how Rush and Reset are just better. For the most part, the reason why Rush, Reset, and Focus Restore are better is because when you're using any of those abilities, it's very likely that that the damage you gain from those abilities ends up being far higher than the damage of the actual damage loot. So for example, if you compare Fancy Timbre and Fancy Loot, if you rush someone who does more damage than Fancy Timbre, then you're basically doing, let's say, 20 damage from a strength weapon instead of 15 from the Fancy Timbre, which makes Fancy Loot more like a 20 damage weapon than a 15 damage weapon. Reset and speed down gives you extra damage in weird ways as too. If you slow down an enemy even by 1, whoever jumps forward, that guy all of a sudden has his entire damage number added to the attack, which is again probably higher than Fancy Timbre. So this is why we value loots with Rush, Reset, or Focus Restore, because they're likely going to give you more damage overall than the actual damage loots.
Yeah, and in a game where it's not giving me talent weapons at all, I think when I get desperate, I go to the Fancy Timbre. But I don't. If I get any worse than that, bone loot or metallic loot, I don't even bother.
One other thing that you mentioned with the bamboo Tarango, now, of course, for those of you that have PC, the other thing to pay attention to is the Restore Focus does take 3 checks to do in lieu of 2, which is what the ukulele takes in order to do the Restore Focus. So there's actually a better opportunity to also do Restore Focus with the ukulele, and it also does 14 damage as well, too. So
good point.
those are different things to consider when it comes to the tier 2 weapons. Anything else before I move on to the special highlight?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so then let's move on. So this is, of course, another DLC add-on. So console players are just going to keep having tears go down their face as we talk about these special weapons. The Shakers. So the Shakers is it's kind of an interesting weapon in itself, because it definitely doesn't have a lot of the utility that the other weapons do have, but it is a stronger physical damage weapon. It does give you crit chance. It does increase your speed. It also gives you a really interesting component, which is a passive skill, Distraction. Distraction is probably one of the best skills to have. So it does give your team a better opportunity to not get hit as much, because Distraction is just a really powerful skill. If you want to, you can watch my skills video that I did a while back to kind of get a breakdown of what the different skills are, but that's a great add to have too. And also, if you need to, you can also stun the enemy as well too. So this is definitely a special highlight and a good weapon to have if you do get your hands on it.
Yeah, Shakers is another one of those weapons where I usually only go to it if I'm desperate for a talent weapon. Distraction's already built into the busker, so it only adds value if you're giving it to a minstrel or a trapper, probably. And it's not giving you the gold multiplier, which is one of the main purposes of having a talent character, is to really be able to be your gold multiplier for your team. So this is just, if I'm not getting anything at all, I might as well be able to try to produce some damage out of my talent character until I can find something better.
Okay, so let's move on to the tier 3 weapons. Now, what we're going to do is we're probably going to start going through the tier 3 and the tier 4 weapons quickly, and you'll kind of get a quick reasoning as to why that's the case. And then what we'll do is we'll stop at the end of the tier 4 weapons to kind of go into a little bit deeper explanation as to why the talent hero is such a good hero to have, because of these abilities that these weapons possess. Now, if you notice this tier 3, the very top one we have in the list is Ornate Loot. Pretty much it's the same exact weapon as, now I always forget, what was the name of the first one? Is it
Fancy Loot?
Fancy Loot. Okay, so what you'll see is like it's pretty much a 1-to-1 comparison. The only differential that you see is a higher damage output. Same rush. It ignores resistance. You can do attack up and the other things, and it also has gold multiplier and support range. Therabow, an upgraded weapon. Does higher damage, but it does all the same things. Speed down. Go to Jade Tarango. What does that do? It's a higher damage output of the ukulele. Now, there is one caveat that I like to point out when it comes to the Jade Tarango compared to the ukulele. It's actually a little bit different because this is also a 3-check restore focus. I actually prefer to hold on to the ukulele from a restore focus point of view, because if you're using that specific ability to be able to do abilities for your other allies, I would much rather actually have the ukulele, again, if you're playing this on PC, not on console, that the Jade Charango I actually wouldn't use, because it's not like you're using it for the 16 damage output per se. At the end of the game, you're doing it more for the restore focus. But I don't want to skip over the Rapier. The Rapier is a very high damage output weapon for the talent hero. So it gives you also a good opportunity to do crit chance. And then the 25% extra damage against armor, not really that big of a deal. It's just a little extra added bonus. But you can also, it does do ignore armor if you're able to hit that minus 10% accuracy for a perfect check. So if you're looking for just some firepower for a short amount of time, the Rapier is kind of a good pickup. Anything that you guys like to add on there?
Yeah, the Rapier is definitely good. The 15% crit chance, which comes with the weapon, when you slap it on any character, that raises the crit chance of that character to 20%. So you're actually quite often going to gain the 25% damage bonus from the Rapier, along with the accuracy from getting a crit. So Rapier ends up doing around 24 damage semi-consistently, which makes it even better. Just a small little thing I wanted to add about that.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's able to pierce as well.
Mm-hmm.
The ornate loot is part of a family tree of loots that has rush on it. So all the way from back in Act 1, you had the decent loot that had rush. In the tier 2 weapon set, you had fancy loot. Here you have ornate loot. And then even moving on past this, there's going to be a silver loot and eventually a golden loot. That whole family tree has rush on it. And the funny thing is that rush, whether you use the tier 1 decent loot or the tier 4 silver loot, rush retains its power. It doesn't matter whether you have rush from a tier 1 weapon or rush from a tier 4 weapon, it still does rush. And it is still just as powerful. One thing I would recommend, though, is if you're playing co-op and you have a talent character in your co-op team, they may get a little bored just doing rush over and over and over again. It's like, just let me know when it's my turn. I'll just rush again, rush again, rush again, rush again. Because that's a lot of times that's what you're doing with those weapons, is rushing constantly. The Thoroughbow is also part of a family tree of loots that do essentially the same thing. They do speed down with damage, and it does single target reset. So you had the Barbat upgrades to the Arch loot, upgrades to the Thoroughbow, upgrades to the fancy Thoroughbow, upgrades to, I believe, like the Royal loot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also part of that same family tree. Reset is reset. It doesn't matter whether you got it from a tier 1 weapon or a tier 4 or tier 5 weapon. Reset is reset. And the speed down, though, with damage, you're getting a boost to the damage output as you're going up that family tree. Once you get to the Arch loot and the Thoroughbow, it has the ability to do a group speed down. So you speed down all of the enemies at the same time without doing any damage. And that also can be extremely powerful because it sets the entire enemy team back, allowing your other characters to get a kill before the enemies get a chance to attack and do damage to you.
That's equivalent. That's equivalent to adding 3 damage packets. Well, more so 2, because the character who is speed down. Well, actually, take that back. It's still 3, because if you speed down the enemy group, the character who's sped down will once again go again before the enemies go. So yeah, it's still 3 damage packets that you do.
A lot of times what you could do is you could do a group speed down and then have your other 2 characters get a kill in, and then it comes back to this character again. And you can't speed them down twice in a row because the speed down effect will still be active. But then you could do a single target reset to reset one, leaving only one enemy that can attack you. So you've gotten 1 kill, you can reset one, and you're really preventing the damage coming back at you. So these loots that can do group speed down can be very, very effective.
Also, a little more about the speed down. There are certain enemies that, when slowed down, are slowed down so much that by the time they come up again, the speed down effect wears off. So you can actually spam the speed down on an enemy. One particular enemy that is very useful to do that on is the Kraken. So if you run into the Kraken, you can just spam the group speed down. It slows down the entire Kraken and its tentacles super far back. By the time they come over again, the speed down effect wears off and you can do it again. So basically, group speed down ends up becoming group reset pretty much for that particular enemy. And the Kraken is a very annoying enemy, so the fact that Thurbo can take care of the Kraken by itself, kind of like a V-Tome can, is awesome.
Yeah, it works really well against high health enemies as well, like ogres. It works great for jellies that poison you, slow them way, way, way down. So a very effective weapon. I like to get either the ornate loot for the rush or the speed down capabilities from things like the Thurbo.
I'm glad you brought that up, Sheldon. I didn't even actually realize that you can slow down the Kraken that much to be able to do that. So that's a great extra point. I do want to add something to it. If you're playing co-op and you have someone who's your talent hero, that's why I don't mind playing the talent hero with Mike and Sheldon, because what I do is I just click a button and then just drink a beer and talk the whole time and drive them crazy, so I don't have to think about what I'm doing. So it's really easy for me. I act like I can just win Masters games all the time. I just click the same button over and over and over again so they can play the whole time. All right, so let's move on from here. Let's go to the rest of the tier 3 weapons. As you can see, the Frost Keytar, of course, is just a strictly damage type weapon. This is a special, you have to get this through collecting some lore, because I think you have to unlock that into the lore store.
Yeah.
The evil loot, again, doesn't really have the greatest abilities attached to it. It does some ignore resistance. It does some bleed. Again, if you go back to our abilities video, you'll know that those just aren't really all that great, especially when you compare it to rush and speed down. The frost loot, again, we're just kind of talking about ones that just have some kind of second tier abilities that aren't really anything fantastic. If you just get your hands on this and you don't have the other weapons, then you can go ahead and use this. And the ebony loot, very much the same, just pretty much does some damage, does some splash, can do a little bit of a power up. But here's where we'll start talking about some of this stuff as we keep going further on into the weapons, is that you're not playing the talent hero to be a damage output hero. You're playing the talent hero to get these abilities and get these extra bonuses. So like the gold multiplier bonus. This is why you're running them. You're not running them so you can get the ebony loot and do 17 damage. It's pointless to be doing that. It just happens to be that we put it on the list so you guys know that this is like the worst of the worst. So if you just happen to get it, then you can put it on, but try to upgrade it as quickly as you can. Anything you guys want to add with the tier 3 weapons?
Yeah, definitely this is the worst of the worst. Rather than using a Frost Keytar, I'd rather use a tier 1 decent loot that can rush.
Yeah,
it's like,
and
I don't need,
we're not even joking. Yeah,
there's no reason to actually go out and seek this weapon. Evil loot doesn't even have gold multiplier on it. Yeah, I consider that just to be a trash weapon. Frost loot, it's a 5-check weapon. I'm never going to get the freeze off. It just doesn't work. So yeah, these weapons, I don't even consider them. If I've already found a arch loot that can do reset and group speed down, then I'm like, forget it. I'll just continue to group speed down, or I'll do single target reset. I don't even bother with these weapons.
All right, so then what we'll do is we'll go on and talk about the best weapons heading into King's Maze. What's really kind of interesting about this, and maybe this is going to be my main talking point here, is that you see that we put ornate loot here as number 1, right? But in reality, the whole reason why we have the ornate loot up there as number 1 is the single target rush. You could literally have that in tier 1, which we talked about in our beginning weapons. Now, I'm going to do this from a beginner's perspective. So I liked creating videos for beginners so they learn. I didn't understand the value of rush when I first started playing this game. So what a lot of people would probably say, well, why is rush such an important feature? Is that there's going to be times like when you're running with a strength weapon or a strength hero that they'll end up getting like a really high damage weapon. You can even get, no joke, a 32 damage weapon heading into King's Maze if you're lucky enough to run onto an embedded blade. If you have just one of these speed up weapons, I will hold on to an 8 damage speed up weapon and literally just click it, just like what Mike was talking about in a co-op group, is just speed up your 32 damage strength hero over and over and over again. And what you're getting is just a massive amount of damage output so you can kill the enemy really fast. Now, what a lot of people would argue then is, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you run 2 strength heroes? Well, you don't always get 2 really, really good weapons. You're likely to land 1 really good weapon. Now, we haven't gone through also the intel weapons, but the intel also has really, really good weapons too. So we like to also like to play with an intel person. So what ends up happening with the talent hero is if you get your hands on one of these weapons, you're literally damaging output, either high magic damage or high physical damage all of the time. And it actually negates what any awareness hero weapon can do. This is why the ability of Rush is so fantastic, because what it does is it really negates anything that the awareness hero can output. So you may look at the damage and say, these weapons are actually worse than the awareness heroes. And actually, when I first started playing this game, I thought the same thing. It's like, why would I switch to talent? It's actually worse.
All right. So the ornate loot and down at the bottom, the fancy loot. Fancy loot is there because it does rush. And that's actually from the tier 2 set. And that's still in the best of the best for going into the King's Maze. I'd rather have that over Frost Keytar or something like that. Heck, I could have even used the tier 1 decent loot for its rush going into the King's Maze. So rush is just that powerful. I could rush my intelligence user with his high damage magic, or I can rush my strength character with his high damage physical attack. I got the choice with rush. It's very, very powerful. And it's only a 2 check with no penalty to your accuracy. So being able to get the rush off is so easy to do. So it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, and that was going to be my secondary point, because the intel, of course, when we talked about holding on to a rush weapon, you usually aren't really able to utilize the rush weapons until the end game, because it has a minus 10% accuracy and usually is a 4 check. So it's really hard to actually do that with using focus if you're not in the 90 to 95 range. Something that Sheldon taught me a long time ago. But when you actually start off the game and you have something like 74 talent, you can easily get up to 76, 78 pretty fast. And if you use 1 focus point, you can pretty much rush at an 80%, 88%, 90% accuracy almost right away, which means you almost can always, I shouldn't say always land, but there's a high chance you're going to land that rush. But there is another part to this too that Sheldon showed me, is that if one of your heroes also is in dire need of needing to Godsbeard, you can actually save their life by rushing them to where they can actually Godsbeard before they end up actually dying. So there's so many parts to rush at beginning game with the talent hero that just way offsets like what any awareness hero can do. And the crazy thing about this too, let's say if you are still able to get the ornate loot, like you're able to land that and go into King's Maze, then at times, since it does ignore resistance, you can also do an okay amount of damage if you absolutely want to, because you can go underneath armor and hit them. But that's not primarily what you're using this for. You're able to use that rush ability, and that's so powerful when it comes to the talent hero. And again, I want to go back to one more point, is that you're almost always going to land one of these weapons. There's literally 4 of them that you can get like up to this point, which means you're going to likely land one and always have that one. So you're almost always going to have rush on your talent hero. And then what you need to, if you want to, you can probably have one of these speed down weapons as well too, like in your back pocket, and you can even switch back and forth if you really, really know the game like Sheldon does. If he's going to want to attack the Kraken and go out to sea, he can actually change his whole setup in order to do that. So there was my big kind of spiel about single rush. So anything that you guys want to add to what I said there?
Yeah, I think we beat it to death already.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about, like, of course, some of the pairings, especially with intel weapons, about what single rush can do with some of the pairings with some of the intel weapons as well, too, when we get further on to some of these other weapons. But going into King's Maze, having an ornate loot and being able to pair that with your like a high damage intel or a high damage strength weapon is usually pretty nice to do.
Yeah, my strength character may have an iron anchor by the time I'm going into the King's Maze, so I'm rushing a 30 damage splashing iron anchor.
Rush is definitely the strongest when it's partnered with a strength character, for sure.
That's exactly right. Okay, so now that you head out into King's Maze, what we want to do is then talk about the tier 4 weapons when you head out. Again,
more copy and paste.
That's pretty much what it is, right?
Yeah.
Silver loot, again, a rush weapon. Fancy thoroughbow, a speed down weapon. Then we start going to the next spot down, lightning loot. Now, lightning loot does have what I would say is an asterisk to this. Now, when you're talking about endgame and going into Vexor's tower, you want to have at least one type of lightning weapon. You need to have something lightning in order to go against the fire revenant at the end of the game. So it's really important to have something. So it's not like necessarily lightning loot is that great, but if you're unable to get a weapon that you need heading into Vexor's tower, of course there's other weapons that like the intel hero can have, or maybe you can get a shock orb going into the final tower. You want to at least get your hands on the lightning loot if you're not able to get your hands on anything else. And then Marat, go ahead.
I also take a look at these from the perspective of going through the demon caves with weapons. And silver loot is that rush weapon, just like the other weapons, and the fancy thoroughbow is the group speed down. Those will serve you quite well in the demon caves. The lightning loot, really, it's not going to help you as much in the demon caves. It does help you to shock high damage enemies like a boomer with a cannon. You shock them so that their cannon can't hit you. But generally speaking, you want to go for the silver loot, which, by the way, silver loot is starts to add additional abilities once you get to this level. It has the ability to do a party attack up. So, when you have the opportunity to get a quick attack up, the rest of your team will do more damage for probably the next 5 character turns after you've done that. So that can also be really, really handy. The maracas, as you were just about to get into, I only go to that if I've been super unlucky and haven't found a rush weapon all the way to this point of the game, or have a fancy thoroughbow or any kind of arch loot or something of that family tree, and I've gotten to this far in the game and I still haven't found a better weapon, then I'm just basically turning my talent character into a damage character with the best damage weapon I can find.
Another interesting thing about maracas, in the terms of its target party speed up, target party speed up is pretty much a poor man's group party speed down. The reason being is when you're speeding down the enemy, you get the full effect of the speed down for every single enemy, because the speed stat is really high and it will never drop to 0. It will drop normally minus 25. With speed up, unfortunately, speed up for the most part increases your speed by 25, and you can't go above 95. That's the rule for any stat, and for the king, you can't go above 95. So if you have a speed stat that would go over 95, then the speed up is just less effective. So
yeah, that's a good point. If your characters have 70 speed, like a scholar has 70 speed or a gladiator has 70 speed, a speed up is only giving you 25 points between 70 and 95 to get additional speed. But with a speed down, if you have an enemy that has 90 speed and you're doing a speed down, then there's 90 points worth of speed that they could potentially fall back into. So you can get enemies to fall back much, much further than you can get your party to actually speed up.
Yeah.
Okay. So then for the rest of these particular weapons in tier 4, very similar to what we've talked about in the other tiers. The cutlass is just a damage output type weapon, gives you a little bit extra speed. It can ignore armor. The katana just pretty much just does 25 damage. And don't forget with these too, is when you switch to these, you're no longer getting the gold multiplier as well too. Now, when you start getting into the end parts of the game, gold multiplier probably isn't as important, because what you want to try to do is build up gold and get herbs and stuff like that early on in the game. You want to make sure you get a stockpile very early on in the game. Doesn't mean gold multiplier is not worth it at the end, but it becomes less and less important. But that doesn't mean you would necessarily switch to the katana because you don't need gold multiplier anymore. Still, the other weapons like the silver loot are better. You'd rather run with maracas than you would with the katana.
And the rush is still going to be doing more damage than 25 if you just simply rush a great hammer user.
And at this point, too, when you talk about rush, I mean, you're probably getting more into the 85-ish range with your stat at this point. And so if you're doing a single focus on that rush, it's pretty much almost a guaranteed. There's even a point when you get it to 90, it's 100% accuracy every single time.
Yeah.
Yes. So... Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to cutlass or katana because I haven't found a better talent weapon to this point, and I'm just trying to do damage with my talent character. The cutlass is rated slightly higher than the katana because of the pierce and the fact that it has additional speed that's added to it. So there's only a 3 damage difference between the two, but the fact that I'm able to pierce is going to guarantee I'm going to get probably more damage out of the cutlass than I am out of the katana.
And the other thing to consider, too, is let's say you're totally snake bit and you've gotten really no good intel weapons or really no good strength weapons or whatever to your other 2 heroes. Maybe rushing those individuals isn't worth it. That happens rarely, but like there could be very rare instances where like you have a lot of low damage output, but I doubt you made it through King's Maze with having really, really crappy stuff across the board. You probably struggled to get through King's Maze. But if that's really the case, then maybe you'd be taking a high damage weapon. But more often than not, that's not going to be the case.
Also, the cutlass and the katana are one-handed, so you can throw a shield onto your talent character and take advantage of shields with those weapons. Because when you look at the fire loot and you look at the ornate tambura, those are basically just going to be doing damage, just like the cutlass and the katana are going to be doing damage. It's a choice of switching into magic damage versus physical damage. I'd rather actually have the physical damage with a shield that I can pierce with than to try to go with something like a fire loot, which I hate the fire loot. It's a 5-check weapon. I'm never going to get the burn to go off because it's got so many checks to get off. It's just terrible.
All right. Then to kind of round out the tier 4 weapons, you have the divine loot. There's really not much to say about it. It's not that good of a weapon. It does give you party heal. If you're made it this far without a party heal, like kudos to you, congratulations. And if then you should probably buy this, but you're not.
Yeah.
Like, good job getting through King's Maze without. You'd have to watch Sheldon's NO Godsbeards challenge to where probably that's the only reason you don't have party heal at this point. But again, you could pick this up if you have to at this point. And then, of course, we always just want to crap on the iron loot tree here, is that this one's just terrible. So
it's like the metallic loot and the iron loot. They're both the crap loot, just sell it.
Crap loot, yeah.
And it's got the coolest sounding names, metallic loot and iron loot. It sounds like it should be hardcore.
Doesn't even have gold multiplier on it. or support range. It's terrible.
Okay, so that ends the tier 4. Now, there was something Mike said about the family tree to the rush weapons. And we're going to go into the tier 5 weapons here. Now, golden loot. Golden loot. Golden loot. Now, the reason why I say that 3 times, now this is my humble opinion, so I'm curious to see Mike and Sheldon, what you guys think about this. When it comes to like strength weapons, there's a lot of high damage output weapons that are out there. Awareness weapons, we made it clear we're not a huge fan of. Intel weapons probably have the most broad range of so many different things. You can do high damage, you can do a lot of other utility. I don't want to go through a full breakdown of it. And where I feel Intel, and I know Sheldon's going to agree with me on this, Intel is probably the most important class to run in your team because of the different array of weapons and abilities that you have. But when you're running talent, I actually think the golden loot is the best weapon to see in the game. And the reason why that is this is like a massive like differential between what I would say is number 1 and number 2. Whereas if you look at Intel, there's like a lot of good stuff where they're kind of more closer together. When you get golden loot, or at least in my head, I see golden loot, I just say game over, like instantaneously.
Daddy-O makes a good point here. So there are really good intelligence weapons that are on par with golden loot. But like Daniel said, since there's so many really good intelligence weapons, you're very likely to see several at them all at the same time. So you end up going like, ooh, which one should I get? But when you hit talent, when you see this, it's an automatic buy because it's on a class of its own. There's no other weapon that's even close to as powerful as golden loot from the talent perspective.
Yeah, the G for golden stands for God. This is the God loot.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, there are only 3 weapons in the entire game that have the ability to do party rush, which is like AoE rush. And golden loot is one of those 3.
Yeah.
The ability to rush your entire party is unbelievably powerful, and the only other 2 weapons that can do that are on the intelligence class weapons.
Yep.
So this is the only other party rush weapon in the game that's not part of intelligence class. So yeah, when I see this, it's like, oh, God loot. It's the one loot that I'm looking for as I'm playing the game. I am praying to find this loot in any of the towns after leaving the King's Maze.
I mean, we already, of course, the cool thing is you're almost always going to have a rush weapon. So like you can always pretty much fall back on, you're going to have one rush weapon. So we'll talk about when we get to Intel, we'll actually talk about the cheese combinations. We'll probably spend a lot of time on Intel because what we'll do is we'll talk about kind of the talent combined with strength, combined with, well, we're not really going to be combining it much with awareness stuff, but when you combine that stuff together, there's some insanely powerful combinations that you can do. So we're probably not going to break that all down right now, but being able to do the party rush is just another step above.
It's a good idea that we're definitely going to do that for intelligence because technically the top 2 weapons that we see right now for talent are the 2 main tactics we're going to talk about in intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
other things about the golden loot too. It's 10% crit chance with a ignoring resistance pierce attack. So if you really need to use it for damage, you can. It has a 20% gold multiplier, which is the highest you're going to get from any weapon in the game. And it also has the ability to do a party attack up built into it. So if you're able to party rush and you're able to get an attack up off before that party rush, your entire team is going to be rushed at a higher damage output level from the attack up as well. So this golden loot is just unbelievably good.
And once we talk about intelligence later on, if you guys remember us talking about golden loot when you guys watch the intelligence, you'll realize that golden loot's even stronger after we actually talk about the tactics that evolve around party rush.
Yeah, so what kind of rounds off the rest of the tier 5 weapons is the royal loot's a pretty decent one. Again, this goes back to this whole speed down effect. You know, you can also do reset with it. It also does have a decent amount of damage to it with 25. Of course, it also has a little bit higher output. Again, you're not necessarily running for talent at this point to be doing high damage output. You're very rarely going to do that. And we're going to talk about what the best weapons are here in a second to actually go into Vexor's tower. Because you'll see something with the royal loot here in a minute. Pearl Tambura just literally is something that you're just damage. Let's hope you're not running this. Like, to be honest with you, you don't really want to be running Pearl Tambura at, like, you're not looking for damage. We're going to say this plenty of times. It's not why you're running talent hero. You're running them for the abilities. Now, Obsidian,
I would use an 8 damage decent loot from tier 1 over the Pearl Tambura, just for the rush.
I've done that in my games.
Yes.
I've ran decently at the end of the game because it has rush.
And Obsidian Triango, like there's some focus restore cheese that you can do to be able to run different combinations to be able to give an opportunity for, being able to rush and hit heavy, like power up damage weapons. In fact, I think Focus Restore is really, really good for the Frost Adventure. I don't want to spoil a game mode for anybody, but you can get particular weapons in that particular mode to where, like, Focus Restore is really, really powerful actually in that particular mode.
And we'll go into great detail about all the cheese tactics once we hit intelligence, because this weapon right here, Obsidian Triangle, what Daddy just said briefly about the Focus Restore, we'll go into great detail about all the cheese tactics you can do with Focus Restore in any type of weapon that has that ability.
Yeah, but again, this goes back to is if you know those cheese tactics, when we talk about rush, when we talk about group party rush, when we're talking about doing Focus Restore, you don't even need Obsidian Triangle. You can literally just have the ukulele. Honestly, this goes back to when we talked about, party heal. I don't want to put it in the same sphere as what we're talking about right now, but it's like party heal, you just get a weapon, you hold it for the entire game. Ukulele, you can get it, hold it for the entire game. You can have, I always forget whatever the beginning is. It the Barbat, the one that does the rush, if that's the name of it?
That's Decent Loot.
Decent Loot. Okay, so Decent Loot is the one that does the single rush. You can have an 8 damage Decent Loot going into the end of this game. So that's why those abilities are so powerful when we start talking about the combinations. So going into Vexor's Tower, we put the Golden Loot is pretty much what I'll use Mike's words. God tier loot is pretty much, I mean, no joke. Like, you talk about combinations like going into the demon caves or going into this and that. Literally, once you get Golden Loot, you put it on. You don't even think about any other combination. You just put it on and you just
never
cheat.
Take it off again.
You just never take it off. So
yeah,
that's what you do. And then of course, Silver Loot. If you notice something here, we put that ahead of the Royal Loot because we find single target rush with a lot of the other things, the other abilities and combinations that you can do is just as important, because what you're doing is you're rushing, the intel weapon, so he can also use this really, really powerful abilities, so you can do these kind of circular effects. So ultimately, but again, I want to kind of just like highlight this right now, why we show something like the fancy loot or the ornate loot. We've said this over and over and over throughout this entire game, is you can have the lowest end one heading into that. And if you're that unfortunate where you haven't had access to like 6 or 7 of these weapons and you're kind of forced to use the Royal Loot, that's just really unfortunate for you. Like, I don't know if I've ever run into a game like that before, but by far, pretty much what you're doing is you're leaning on rush in this game with your talent hero.
Now, to be fair, Royal Loot is actually very powerful. The only reason we're not acting as it's very powerful is because there's a similar weapon that I constantly talk about all the time that's part of intelligence that does the same thing Royal Loot does, and you get it almost every single game. So this is why we're not going into great detail about how powerful the Royal Loot is, because technically, if you're running a talent character but not an intelligence hero, I would actually value Royal Loot probably number 1, to be honest, because party reset is actually more valuable than rush is. But once you have party reset, then then you want rush. Would you agree with me, Mike? Or
Royal Loot, yeah. Royal Loot
Okay.
is one of only 2 weapons in the game that can do target group reset. And the other weapon that has target group reset is in the intelligence class, and it's a weapon that is extremely easy to get.
Yeah.
So, and you get it much earlier. You get it during tier 3, or tier 4 actually. Whereas this, you're waiting till tier 5 to get it. So if you really, really needed target group reset, Royal Loot is one of only 2 weapons that can do it. Although by the time you're getting to this, it's so late in the game, it's probably a moot point by then.
And again, if you're running intelligence, it's incredibly easy to get. In fact, it's so easy to get, you can get like 3 copies of this weapon like 50% of the time every single game if you focus down. Like, how often do you get 3 of the same exact weapon of any weapon in the game, and yet you can get 3 copies of this particular weapon consistently? That's pretty, like, oh my god. Like, yeah. You'll know what we're talking about once we talk about intelligence.
I'm actually glad that you kind of brought up this point. The reason why we give you guys this information in terms of how to tier list all of these abilities is to give you guys that, like, in certain instances, of course, rush may not be applicable. Like, it may not be a good tactic to use. It's just what we're talking about is it's typically the best tactic to use if you have, like, the right setup, the right people. And it usually always ends up being the case. They're always weird outliers. If you decide to run 3 strength heroes, you can win the game running 3 strength heroes. It's not the most ideal setup in the world. We wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Like, you can have fun and play that. So then what you might be looking at is like single reset weapons and stuff like that to kind of balance those off. And that's where rush maybe becomes a moot point. But what we're trying to tell you is the most powerful setup is having 1 intel, 1 strength, and 1 talent hero, because what it does is it takes all these fantastic abilities, uses them with each other, and a lot of times, even if you don't get like the best of the best, you can still get some really high output that ends up making the lives of your games much easier. This is why, like, I wanted to make sure this clarification happened, because, like, you can win a game with Hunter. Like, it's not that you can't win the game with Hunter. It's just you're actually making it more difficult on yourself to run it with Hunter. The talent hero just gives you more value, especially in combination with the intel hero and a strength hero. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, we went through the awareness weapons on the previous video, and you're basically just going for raw damage from awareness weapons. They don't have a lot of utility. I would actually rather have a trapper that can actually use some of these talent weapons over a hunter that has only really the ability to run awareness class weapons, because the talent weapons just bring so much more value to you with these abilities. So, yeah, I agree with that.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys taking the time to join us for this session of weapons going over talent. What we're going to be going through next is the strength weapons. We're going to be doing it the same way, going from tier 2 all the way to tier 5, what the best weapons are in the game for there. So please feel free to join our Discord and ask any questions that you may have in regards to what we've discussed in the past, whether it had to do with the Masters runs, with the abilities of weapons, the beginning weapons, and anything with the awareness and talent. And if there's anything in particular that you would like for us to bring up in the strength and intel weapons, if there's something that comes to your mind, let us know. Leave them in the comments below, or feel free to join the Discord and leave it there. For myself, Sir Imperial Mike, and Sheldon, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we appreciate your time. Have a good one.